To get a
We will now call this meeting to order. So we'll welcome everybody today to the Code Enforcement Officers Advisory Committee public hearing or public meeting on May 10th, 2018. My name is Teresa Adrian, and I am the presiding officer and present, and I'll continue with our roll call. Richard Adams. Jennifer Bernal. Present. Marie Brown. Matthew Christensen.
Present.
Sylvia Flood. Crystal Miles.
present.
Mariola Sullivan.
Present.
And Stuart Walker.
Present.
Okay, thank y'all. Thank you all for being here today. Staff, thank you for coordinating the meeting and doing a wonderful job as usual. The first order of business will be the approval of minutes from the meeting of December 14th, 2017. Has everybody had an opportunity to review the minutes? Are there any edits? Everyone in favor of approval of the minutes, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Seeing none, we'll approve those minutes.
Madam Chair, Carla James, TDLR. I think we maybe need a motion and a second prior to the approval.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you for that.
You bet.
So is there a motion?
I move
To
that we
approve.
accept the minutes.
Okay.
Second.
We have a second. Now please vote.
Aye.
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 Okay, it passes. Okay. So the next portion of our meeting on the agenda is for public comments. Do we have any public comments? Nobody registered? Okay, so we'll move on to the staff reports. The first staff report will be the licensing division.
Good afternoon, board members. I'm Lisa Hodek, licensing manager.
My report will be a little brief today, and I'm just presenting you with the numbers started in November through the second quarter, which is February. Our code enforcement numbers, right now our total population is at 2405. Our online renewals are at 88%. The renewals, the quickest way basically to renew the license is by doing it online. So we always encourage people to do that. Maybe see that number get up a little bit. The code enforcement officer in training, they are at 100% renewals. Of course, there's just 12 of those that renewed online. And the total population is 131 with a combined total of 2536. There's not much else to report. We're gradually getting in applications here and there, and I'll be glad to answer any questions that you may have of me.
Does anybody on the committee have any questions? No. Questions? I just offer up a compliment. I've actually gone through the physical process of doing the online renewal, and it was very simple to do. So
Great.
No glitches whatsoever.
Great.
So I hope everybody else had that experience when they were doing their renewals.
Okay.
So thank you.
Good to hear.
All right.
Thank you.
Next one is the Customer Service Division.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and board members. My name is Trey Seals, and I'm the Director of the Customer Service Division. It's good to see you all again. I will be doing an introduction today, as this is the second meeting for this board and my first time attending. We recently, at the beginning of the year, were, as a Customer Service Division, asked to include ourselves as part of the agenda for each of the advisory boards. So I will be introducing myself formally for each board, and then after that, in future meetings, the manager responsible for this program will be Misty Maldonado de Leon, and she will be reporting on behalf of customer service in future meetings. To cover the introduction part of the agenda here, we are a staff of 52 full-time employees, and with that staff, we receive approximately 2,000 calls per day and 400 emails per day. So we're extremely busy. So we're like a duck on the water, furiously kicking underneath the surface. We look real cool and calm. We like to have fun. We like to laugh off the stress. We like to get the job done. Very hardworking group. We took up approximately 500,000 calls in the last fiscal year, and we're trending to meet or exceed that this fiscal year. So we've had a rise in volumes of calls since the second phase of the new programs that came over from the SHS, and just the last year was a really interesting combination of factors that came together all at one time. And we are doing everything we can to figure out how to get past that and to recover and to be fully staffed. I'm currently hiring as well. So we do offer assistance in several languages in our division, English, Spanish, Vietnamese, Korean, and Mandarin. We also answer the social media posts, so questions that come in through Facebook and Twitter, and Google reviews now. So we respond to all of those. And we also assist customers in the front lobby with any walk-ins that have questions about an application. For this particular industry, we primarily are seeing calls about just simple application questions, license status, that kind of thing, as to, any basic introductory, hey, here's what the account login looks like, those kinds of questions. So it's been a pretty steady volume, and we are now starting to see an increase in contacts. We're not exactly certain what that is, but we are digging in to figure that out. Just to give a quick little history of the Customer Service Division, I came over from the Cosmetology Commission when it was moved over to TDLR, and that was in 2005. So I've been with the agency for this many years in different role, but recently in the director role for the Customer Service Division, and all of my time at TDLR has been in the Customer Service Division, and I love that. But again, a hard-working group of people. There is a lot of work to do across the agency. We're involved in the strat planning as well, but it's a great time. About the statistics, as you'll see in your report, it was trending 300 to 250 calls per month, and now we're up to, at the end of March, approximately over 400 calls and emails. And in this particular case, different industries have different traditional ways they like to contact us. In this case, we do see more phone calls than emails. In other industries, we do see evenly distributed across phone calls and emails. And then, of course, in some industries, they do prefer email over phone call. So in this industry, we do get several phone calls. So, but we are working hard to keep up with that volume and to meet the needs of each industry we serve. That concludes my report, and I am happy to entertain any questions, should you have them.
Does the committee have any questions?
I do. Director, what is your response time on your emails?
On the emails, well, right now, it is down to 2 days at this point. It's something that we constantly juggle between Mondays being our busiest day for phone calls and Tuesdays. And then towards the end of the week, things slow down as far as phone calls, but we're always looking to figure out, okay, how many people can we have focus solely on email when we have a specialized team for this particular industry and several of the other industries from the health and health professions related programs.
And then on your emails, is it a standard comment that we are providing to our citizens, or is it catered to each individual email?
We do use templates, however, we do customize those templates. And we do research the question and reach out to the various divisions who we need information from to relate to the customers. We don't actually process most of the work. We're actually the messenger, and we act as a guide and relay information both to internal divisions and to external customers to make sure wherever a stoppage or a gap or a breakdown of communication has happened, we are there to smooth that over and make that process come to a conclusion so that the customer can get a decision and move on to licensure.
I have a question. You
Yes.
had said that you get more phone calls than anything from the code enforcement group.
Currently.
And I'm curious, do you dissect those phone calls and figure out, are we getting questions asked about things that are not, or information that is not available on the website, and then using that data, go on and dump more information on the website to help minimize those phone calls? Do you
Yes.
kind of go through that process?
We do, and we work directly with Nick Bowenus' staff in the Office of Strategic Communications. Josh Schroeder is one of the web administrators, and we are looking at, we use wrap-up codes to determine what the call was about, and then when we see trends or patterns, this could use an update to this language here, we definitely get that information to that team to make that change.
And with all of you, all of a sudden combining your your customer service efforts and outreach, you have some folks that are new to answering questions about code enforcement. So we're about 6 months into this.
Right.
Are you starting to feel a little more comfortable fielding those questions and everyone getting being a little bit more of a subject matter expert the longer they're in this?
Yes, and that's a great point. We started with a smaller group to make sure that we understand the ins and outs of this particular industry, because it may be similar to another, but not the same. So that's where it takes the critical thinking to distinguish between, what is the correct answer for this question. And if it's beyond our scope, we do reach out to our regulatory program management or our licensing team immediately and won't attempt to answer something beyond our understanding. But yes, to answer your questions, we have begun to feel more comfortable and confident with this particular program. And once we feel that we have this particular information down, we do have a knowledge base that we are building with answers to standard repetitive questions that we can then open up the folks who do have the access to those calls to answer those calls and emails using a knowledge base, so that we do give a consistent response to our customers. It is a work in progress.
You guys are doing a great job.
Mary Winston, TDLR. I wanted to compliment Trey because he's been doing this report, and he's always, we do. They have an amazing operation. And at any time on his Surface, I think you gave up the laptop for the Surface. But
Yes, I did.
on the Surface, on the phone, whatever, there's a running tally of who's on hold. It's a full call center. How many minutes? how many calls have been answered by this team. They do matrices to figure out what they need to do. This is all under the direction of Nick Voynis, because as director, he part of his, chief of staff,
Yes.
part of his purview is internal and external strategic communications.
Right.
So Trey's team, it's practically a science, the way they handle customer service. And when they are, Ms. Miles, when he said, it's 2 days, it's killing them. That
Yes.
it's 2 days. It is killing them that, so because they're constantly working on what's a better way to do it. So today is the first time I think I've actually gotten a real picture or seen him give the real picture of what they really do. That office is not in this building, but I always tell people, if you ever want to see a well-oiled machine, come down to EOT and watch that customer service floor. They do a fantastic job.
Thank you, Mayor.
I know that I've enjoyed the responsiveness of everybody from all the different departments. As far as the improvements that you've made along the way, I know that you guys have had some challenges.
Yes.
And, not everybody feels that they get responded to as quickly as they think they should.
Sure.
But when you say 2 days, just for the record, you're saying 2 business days, I'm assuming.
So let me, as you were
Because
saying
if
that.
it's a Friday, wouldn't it be about Tuesday? And so someone might think it's
Sure.
taking forever to get
Sure.
responded to, but really, it's still just 2 business.
Absolutely. So we're a little more innovative than that, and Mary reminded me of a couple things, and then actually a couple things that have been said, or some things come to mind. As part of our response at the beginning of the year, after November, when the new programs came over in the beginning of the year, we were still dealing with, Harvey and several things, but we did do overtime. We do extra things to allow folks to flex their schedule, to work on email specifically when the phones aren't going, because it's difficult for folks to do both at the same time. And we work on Saturdays. If we see a long line of emails that need to be responded to, we will come in on a Saturday, or we have folks who work from home who will log in for a couple of hours to knock out some of those responses. But we're really careful about who can answer which emails to make sure that we get the consistent response. But yes, we did overtime, we did flex schedules. You need to work fewer hours on this day during the week, and you were coming in on Saturday, different creative strategies to address those. And as a matter of fact, before I came over today, my ombudsman over this particular, the health programs came in. Well, she came by and she says, you need to look at the snapshot, which is the view that Mary was talking about. And I looked at the email count, and we were at like double digits instead of, the several hundred that we have every day. So I immediately ran to the room where they sit, and I gave them a round of applause and thanked them very heartily and said that they would be recognized this month in our division meeting. So it is something that we definitely continue to strive to get better and do.
And on the flip side of the coin, us as the customer, wanting to utilize your services, we don't need to wait until the 11th hour to make our request. We need to be on our game as well and give you the time that you need to respond, because you're dealing with the entire state. And
Right.
so, I think that I would like that message to go out to all of the code enforcement officers. The only emergency is one that was created by someone who possibly didn't have their information ready to go to renew their license perhaps, and now it's urgent.
Right.
But, we need to be better at what we do so that we can set you up to succeed too, because you're here to serve us, but, we're partners in this.
Thank you.
And so we appreciate what you do.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Carla James, TDLR. I wanted to add that there are times when customer service is overwhelmed, much like we saw when the Phase 2 programs came over from Department of State Health Services. We round up the troops. We've got people from other divisions coming in. It's not singular for customer service or singular for licensing. We start offering anybody who wants to start working and has knowledge of these programs to come in and assist. Our regulatory program management folks were of great assistance, answering emails and assisting with the processing of licenses. So we kind of rally the troops and bring them in, but we do appreciate the patience folks have had with us. And, Trey's group has been really working their tails off, as has the licensing group, and not to say that the rest of the agency hasn't been, but they took a large part of the work when everything came over. And, you know, we're not working with the newest equipment either. And, I mean, it's not cans and string, but with 500,000 phone calls coming in a year. So we are also looking at enhancing our telephone systems so that we can handle those loads and better direct the calls, possibly spend shorter time on the calls so that our customers are not waiting. I'm not a very patient person, and anyone who knows me fairly well knows that. If I have to wait longer than a couple minutes on hold, I'm already mad. And so I consider myself to be our customer, even though I'm sure no one's as bad as me. But that's kind of the realm that we're looking at. So there's some upgrades happening on a lot of different fronts, but we do appreciate everyone's patience as we've gone through this transition.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other? Okay. Good to see you again.
Next one is Education and Examination Division. Oh, excuse me,
That's okay.
Enforcement Division.
Not a problem.
We don't need to talk about enforcement.
No, absolutely not. I mean, we can just go sit right back down. No.
Sorry about that.
No worries, no worries. Good morning, or afternoon, actually. My name is John Millick. I'm a prosecutor with the Enforcement Division to go over this enforcement report for you. Typically, this is kind of what it will look like. In addition to this report, from things that we're currently working on, maybe meetings, external work groups that we've dealt with, you'll also see some case highlights. Those will be cases of, little snapshots of cases that have either gone to a default order, an agreed order, or something that we've taken before the State Office of Administrative Hearing and gotten a commission order on. We don't currently have any of those right now, but in future reports, you'll probably see some of those things. Currently, on April 23rd of this year, we had an enforcement work group meeting to talk about our criminal conviction guidelines. Ms. Miles, Mr. Walker, and Ms. Adrian were a part of that work group to develop what the criminal conviction guidelines are. It's actually part of the agenda later today, and Mr. Trevor Thielen will be back up here to talk with you about that and to kind of go over what the criminal conviction guidelines are going to be for this program and ask for that adoption. But again, that will be handled later. Just basically quickly moving on over to the statistics, as you can see, since you guys have come over in November, we've had 15 cases opened. We've resolved 4 of those. We've yet to assess any administrative penalties. So the resolution of those 4 cases basically came in one of 2 ways. Either a warning was issued or there was not sufficient evidence, so we just went ahead and closed that cases. So the other 11 are kind of in the pipeline. As we discussed in our last meeting, basically, once we get a complaint that comes into our intake section, once we review that we've got jurisdiction over it, it moves over to the investigator phase. That's where those current 11 cases are at this point in time. So they're in the gathering of the information stage, and then once the investigator is finished in that process, they'll get turned over to one of the prosecutors to review for legal sufficiency and determine whether or not an administrative penalty needs to be assessed or whether or not there wasn't sufficient evidence and we can close it, or maybe some kind of alternative remedy was happen, like an informal resolution, and the case will be handled in that regard. But with that regard, if you've got any questions, I'll be happy to answer them.
I have a question, and I know this is a small number, small percentage.
Mr. Christensen,
short
I
time.
hate to interrupt you, but I just received an urgent email that they cannot hear anything that y'all are saying. Could you move the mics a little closer? Not really urgent, but it was said urgently. And I'm just happy that our staff is watching the meeting. So this came actually from 3rd floor. Thank you, John.
Silent
But,
movies.
yeah. Okay.
I can sign it. Small numbers, short period of time, but is there any type of complaint trend in those 15 folks, or is it just?
That I don't know. Until I actually get to see the cases, I won't know that. But once we start getting a bigger collection of them in and through the prosecution stage where we've actually had to take a look at them and see kind of what the top trends of cases that we're citing as violations, we'll have a better information at that. But considering that we've closed all these cases, we just don't know that yet.
Okay, and is that information you'll publish in one of the reports?
We can definitely get that information for you once we start getting that.
Thank you.
Any further questions? Thank you.
All right, thank you.
So now we will hear about education and examination in that division. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and board members. Are you sure you don't want to call enforcement back up? My name is Jerry Gonzalez, and I'm with the Education and Examination Division. My report is fairly short. Before you, we provided the numbers for the examination statistics that we've had November through the end of March, as well as the numbers for the audits for the continuing education through the end of March as well. To date, as far as we're aware, there haven't been any issues of any sort. So for now, we're still gathering and moving forward, but it all seems to be transitioning smoothly. I'd be happy to answer any questions if I can for you.
Any questions?
I do.
Go ahead.
Okay. It looks like we got some pretty wild swings
Yep.
in percentages of pass fail. Is there anything that could attribute that to?
Right now, I couldn't be able to tell you definitively. We'll have to, get some more numbers and see what areas, I guess, candidates are struggling in or doing well in. As you and I spoke about earlier, it's on the radar where we'll need to sit down and discuss the curriculum versus the examination portion of it. But to this point, we haven't set a meeting yet for the work group for the education examination area.
Okay, and is this something you look for as fluctuations?
Yeah,
to
they'll
that
go through
degree?
the, yes,
Okay.
sir. They'll look that through the examinations.
Okay, excellent. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Carla James, TDLR. So y'all want that information at your next meeting, is that accurate? Okay, I just want to make sure we get down what you want.
Ray Pizarro, Director for the Education Examination Division. Jerry's right, 100%, but I want to give you a little bit more texture to this. We have, as we were saying, we would conduct a subject matter expert group, a little work group, not the advisory board work group, but it will be a subject matter work group that we bring together, sit at the table, and vet all of the questions. So the way it kind of works is we look at all of the questions as they've been being performed, and we we ask ourselves, how are they doing? Are they performing well? Are they poorly performing? Poorly performing can mean everyone's getting it right. That's poorly performing. Or it could mean everybody's getting it wrong. So we need to look at that. We also look at individuals who have passed the test but got question number 6 wrong, and everybody who's failed the test got question number 6 right. So what's going on? So we look at all of these different stats, not just pass, fail, but individual questions on how they're performing to ensure that we are asking the right questions to make that assessment so that we are licensing the minimally competent person. So this is an ongoing battle, and we don't have these meetings frequently. It just depends on how many times those items have been seen or how many times the exam has been administered. So we like to see at least 50 times that the exam's been attempted. So we have a good sample of statistics. With, for example, with the cosmetology and barber, we review them almost all the time, very frequently, because we have 200,000 of those people licensed, and we administer collectively with PSI 60,000 exams a year. You guys are a smaller piece, so you won't see a lot of commerce of us looking at the exams frequently, but we will look at them, especially now and initially, because Pearson VUE has told us when they gave us the items that the items have not been reviewed. So it's due for us to put our eyes on it, bring in the people that know about code enforcement, and let's take a look at them. So to your point, they need to be reviewed.
Thank you.
So something else that is a possibility to be reviewed or considered for review is the instructor of the basic code enforcement course. And, we've got several different people that teach that class, but have you ever looked at the failures of the exams and connected that to who's teaching these classes? Are you able to see that kind of data? Where did you get your instruction? And is that a common denominator, for a lot of the people that are failing? Because, we've all been to classes, and there are good instructors and there are not so good instructors. And, I would venture to say that when you have a really good instructor, they're going to set those students up to succeed and prepare them so that they can pass that exam. And so, do you have any involvement from that aspect, or is it merely just the exam itself?
So let me answer it this way. Most of our examinations, when we develop them, they're based off of the curriculum. Let's just use that term, the curriculum of what they need to know. It should never be the other way. We should never have an exam that the folks who are teaching the curriculum have to look at the exam and say, oh, I need to teach that, what's on the exam. Because that's not how it should be. We should be assessing, if we went to your school, I need to see if Ms. Teresa's school, the students are doing well, and I'm going to know that based on how we develop the exam. You shouldn't have to change your ways of teaching, right? So I need to know, you're going to have a certain curriculum of what you should be teaching, so we need to make sure we develop that exam based on those topics of what you should be teaching. So what we've done with other industries is we've done on the website, we have by school, for example, here are the pass-fail rates by school and we have based on the topics.
Okay.
I don't know if we could do something here. We need to talk more about that. But we've done something like that so that we can visually see, here are people, how they're performing based on the topics that they need to know by that kind of thing.
And I agree with that. The curriculum should be catered around what does that code enforcement officer need to
Right.
know. And that's what should be being taught.
Right.
And everybody has their own style of teaching or instruction, but you have some that are better than others. And so my question was really, is there any vetting process for people that are actually out there teaching this class? Are there any qualifications for people that teach this class? Because I've seen some good ones over the years, and I've seen some that
Right.
weren't as good as the good ones.
And we need to see how much, another thing we need to look at, and I don't have these rules or laws memorized yet, so we need to look at how much oversight we have before we go and knock on somebody's door and say, hey, what are you doing? So we need to, but to your point, I mean, it's yeah, absolutely. And one last thing I would like to say is we do want advisory board members part of that SME group. So if you guys have not put your name out there to be part of it, I would encourage just for some of you to be a part of that SME group so you know firsthand what are we doing, how we're doing it. You guys are the subject matter experts as well. That's why you're here. And so I would hope that you guys would participate in that group as well.
Thank you.
Thanks.
All right. So the next one is Regulatory Program Management Division.
Good afternoon, Stuart Myrick, Regulatory Program Management, and here to give you this report. The report is before you, so I'm not going to read it verbatim. I'll hit a couple of highlights. Katie Bryce and I were at the Texas On-Site Wastewater Association Conference back in March in Waco. Visited with several code enforcement officers as well as sanitarians, and it was good to have that kind of exposure, not to mention seeing some very large tanks. That was interesting. A couple other notes. You notice we mentioned about our newsletter, the Health Monitor, that's going out to every one of the medical and health professions and health-related professions. The second newsletter went out in February. We're actually working on and about to wrap up the third one, and it should be sent out later this month. So be on the lookout for that. Has some good content in that. A couple other things. As Trey mentioned and as Carla mentioned, we were brought in, we asked to learn the software that customer service uses to respond to emails, and we pitched in on helping to respond to several of those, seeing that most of us have lots of experience with these programs. And it was a great experience, great to learn that side of TDLR, as well as being able to help out in that way to help them respond to those emails much quicker and give them the service they deserve. So, and then on top of that, we are doing some monthly training sessions for customer service covering various topics within medical and health professions. And those, we have 2 or 3 topics that we'll focus on, and then we open it up to questions on any one of the professions, and that, of course, includes code enforcement officers. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Are there any questions? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right. Next item is the executive office.
Yes, ma'am, Madam Chair. Nick Boenis of TDLR, welcome, and thanks for being here. Appreciate your service. Here to bring you executive staff report, a little briefing on what's going on around the agency. Wanted to tell you that we received some good news recently from the governor's office when Governor Abbott announced the appointment of 2 new commissioners to our board for terms that expire in 2023. So the board is back at full strength, and the governor added Dr. Ray Callis, who's a physician anesthesiologist from Beaumont, and Dr. Gary Wesson, who's a retired orthodontist living in Bastrop, to our 7-member commission. We've got additional biographical information on them on our website. Feel free to check it out. The commission next meets on Thursday, May 24th. The agency's in the process of completing our strategic planning exercise, and it's something that the legislature requires all state agencies do every 2 years, and it's something that we take very seriously. 2 years ago, we identified 56 strategic initiatives to take to the legislature, and we're proud to report that 52 of them were passed and signed into law. Want to stress that all of our constituents had a voice in the process, from licensees to consumers, and advisory board members, industry reps, and so on. All of them were encouraged to participate. We hosted external sessions in Arlington, El Paso, Houston, McAllen, and Austin. And want to add that when we were out in El Paso, Richard Adams was unable to join us that day, but he sent 2 of his finest, Jenny and Danny, out to visit with us, and they provided us with some really, really good comments and ideas, and we're real happy about that. But these sessions were an opportunity for everyone to share ideas and opinions and tell us how we're doing and what we can be doing to improve on our services. So. And for those that were unable to make any of the public sessions, we did make available on our Facebook page and our website questions of a survey that people could participate that way, and we had a lot of feedback there. We also did internal sessions with our staffs throughout the agency and did that throughout March and April. But now we're in the process of compiling the comments and the ideas and are drafting the final report, which should be out in early June. Also want to talk to you a little bit about outreach, including our website. Start with there. Wanted to update you on some traffic numbers associated with your program, and the numbers are good. Over the past 6 months, the Code Enforcement Officer's website had 27,608 page views, which averages out to about 152 a day. 70% of those who accessed your site did so from a desktop, while 25% did so from a smartphone and 5% from a tablet. The top reasons for visiting the site, number 1, forms, followed closely by online licensing, continuing education, exam information, and frequently asked questions. I want to say that our web group has been busy making some little tweaks and improvements, freshening up the page, making it a little more user-friendly, and we're going program by program, fixing those pages and making them easier to deal with, and we're real happy with the results so far there. Also want to remind you about our Facebook and Twitter presence, and if you're on social media, follow us there for TDLR news and information. We also, as part of our outreach program, have about you guys have about 6,000 subscribers who receive various email blasts pertaining to the program, and that includes the newsletters that Stuart was talking about and any notices pertaining to the program. And if anyone is not receiving those and would like to, simply go to the website and you can subscribe to them. And if you have any questions, be glad to answer them. Otherwise, thank you.
I don't have a question, but I have a kudo. I'm
Sure.
going to give Carla a kudo. She was at the Arlington strategic planning outreach efforts that you were involved in, and she did a fabulous job presenting the information and fielding the questions, and I was very impressed. And I had one of my staff members with me. He's here today, and this was a good observation opportunity for him just to see that public input, effort, and progress, and you did a wonderful job.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I wanted to thank you and your staff for attending as well. It's time out of everybody's day, and we realize that, so we better make it worth y'all's time out of your day, and that's what we try to do. So thank you very much for your attendance.
And you say you don't have a lot of patience, but that was a lively crowd, and you exercised a lot of patience.
I'll say that my 20-year wedding anniversary is coming up, so it's been a work in progress. I do have something that I'm going to ask Christine to pass out for y'all. We were talking about customer service and the massive screens that they've got and all the detail that they have. And our customer service folks, while Trey was visiting with you all, checked and sent us a snapshot of things going on so that you can see exactly the kind of stuff they're looking at. It's pretty detailed. It tells you how many calls are waiting, what the calls are about. A lot of information that I think that would probably make my eyes cross, but they do it very well, so that you could see the level of detail that they're into. I know that there has been some concerns that we heard about in the strategic planning sessions, and we're on top of it. We're catching up, but so that you see the level of detail and what we're working through and the knowledge base that our folks are building. It's very important to us to be able to service our customers in a timely fashion.
So have you guys been going through some like Lean Six Sigma processes?
We have
process
2 black
improvements?
belts on staff.
Okay. Well, I'm a green belt, and so
Okay.
this has got Lean Six Sigma written all
Oh, yeah,
over it.
yeah. We have 2 black belts on staff in our Office of Innovation.
That's awesome. That's great. Thank you for this. And you guys do a good job, and trust me, you're the first point of contact for everybody, and so I'm sure that not everyone is just wonderfully happy the minute you get to hear their voice, and so on behalf of all of the code enforcement officers across the state, I'll just apologize to you all. We can be pretty tough sometimes. Okay, so the next agenda item is discussion and possible action to recommend approval of the criminal conviction guidelines for the code enforcement officer program.
Do we have any work group reports that?
Oh,
Ready to get to the.
oh,
meat.
you know, I am old school, and I usually have a hard copy in front of me, and I just scanned
Scroll
right by
down.
that.
Yeah.
That's-
And
Again.
we're going to get you a hard
And-
copy right now, so, because I don't have one
Because
either
my
and I'm
pen
struggling.
will not check these off. I'm trying to become more paperless, but it's not happening as quickly as I would like.
Well,
Okay, so
Jerry
the work
jumped up
work
before we
group
could get there.
reports.
Thank you, Jerry.
So Jerry's, and I stole Christine,
you
so
so
I think
much.
we're in good shape.
Thank you.
And to be clear, the only reason I was able to interject is because I stole Christine's piece of paper.
My sister over there, okay. So for the work group reports, the licensing division work group?
I think that one, Matthew, Richard, Doug, and I had discussions, some subjects such as number of trainees that a supervisor should be in charge of, as well as supervisor opportunities for emerging code enforcement, or code groups, like for officers in training for municipalities that are starting codes departments. So we had some good discussion and got that back to Doug.
And so, as you guys continue those conversations, will there be opportunity for more dialogue? Because I know for that particular topic, I do have a few concerns. You know, from a municipality standpoint, just a budgetary consideration, you know, to put a hard, fast number in there, you know, I don't know what everyone's budgets look like. I don't know what everyone's oversight looks like. It's very different throughout the state. And so to have a hard, fast number in there, I don't know that that does us any favors. So maybe a consideration is to just repeal that language that was already there and just make it go away.
Madam Chair, Doug Jennings, Assistant General Counsel. I believe the work group is going to continue to meet probably before the next scheduled meeting of this body. and try to present some options to the board. And I do anticipate that one of the options will be maybe repealing the limitation on the number of supervisees. And, all of those things, our staff and our director will kind of need to give a look at those options also, and will kind of give us feedback. But we'll get the work group talking about some ideas, and we'll have some options for the board, and then we can have a bit of a fuller discussion about it at the next meeting.
That'll be wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any more questions? Okay, as far as the Education and Examination Division work group, I was part of that work group, and I don't recall everybody that was on that call. I know Crystal was on that call. We talked about the education and examination, and we don't have any changes at this time. I think that you all did a wonderful job going through and striking out anything that was redundant as we did this transition, and it's a pretty clean copy, and it really does address all of the important areas relevant to education and examination. So we didn't have any changes at this time. Now, let's talk about the approval of the criminal conviction guidelines.
Good morning, committee. My name is Trevor Thielen, and I am an enforcement prosecutor, also just like John Medlock, who you heard from earlier, except that we do slightly different daily work. And when we go to court, we're going for different reasons. I'm one of the two prosecutors we have who focuses exclusively on what do we do with license applicants or licensees who have criminal histories. And regularly we're reviewing these people's criminal histories, we're making decisions about whether we should proceed, and then we're taking all of the actions that are required to pull those licenses, deny those applications if necessary. Today, I'm here to discuss with you criminal conviction guidelines for the Code Enforcement Officer Program. These guidelines were developed by members of a work group made up from the committee. Ken Sharp, the other enforcement prosecutor who does criminal history work, also worked on them. And together, y'all developed the draft that we're going to go over at the end. But first, I'm going to give an overview of what we do and how we do it, how we come to these decisions, so you can understand it, so you can ask questions if you have any, and so that we'll be a little more informed on what the conviction guidelines are used for when we get to that part at the end. And at the end, I'm going to ask that you recommend adoption of the criminal conviction guidelines with any changes that might come up today to the commission, so that we can really have a firm basis for moving forward with what we do every day on these cases. I think the most important thing to remember is that this is not a mathematical equation. We give every single applicant or licensee with criminal history an individual look to really come to a rounded decision on should the department act in this case, and how should we act? Or does this person meet muster, or at the very least, have they proven that despite they have a criminal history that might have some concerning stuff in it, have they proven that they've moved past it? And the process is really set up to afford them many opportunities to pass muster. The rules that the criminal conviction guidelines that you help us develop get us closer to a mathematical equation. But at the end, it is a judgment call. And we make these judgment calls on hundreds of licensees every single day. When we make any judgment call against somebody being licensed, there's a lot of due process that goes forward to make sure that we are making the right decision and that it's going through a number of levels of review. The first level of review is we conduct an investigation before we take any negative action against somebody for their criminal history. The second is after the prosecutor has looked at it, looked at all the information that was gathered in the investigation, we notify them in writing with a letter or a notice of exactly what we're concerned about in their criminal history, what we know that we can prove, and here's the laws and the rules that affect you. And here's why we're making this decision. if anything that we are putting in writing is incorrect, they can come to us and help us correct it. It's very rare that we make mistakes at that point, but just yesterday, a barber applicant notified us that I had, in my template, described what I thought was a aggravated assault with a deadly weapon as a felony. He pointed out, well, that's what I was charged with, but it was actually pled down to a terroristic threat, which is a misdemeanor. And in lots of cases, that might not make a difference. In this particular case, that made me rethink the whole approach that I was taking to the case, and I ultimately decided, you know what, I don't think we can take action against his license, and issued a clear. So they can communicate with us to correct any mistakes that we have. Assuming that isn't the case, they can ask for a hearing in front of an independent administrative law judge at the State Office of Administrative Hearings. And they get their opportunity to present whatever evidence that they want to the administrative law judge to convince the administrative law judge they should have the license. Now, we get the same opportunity not only to present our evidence, but to question their evidence and their testimony. But they're getting an independent recommendation from that administrative law judge. They're also getting a chance to challenge our legal analysis of the case and have we followed the right steps. That ALJ is going to get the chance to weigh in, but they're not going to make a final decision. The case is then going to come back to the Commission of Licensing and Regulation, the 7-member board appointed by the governor, and they meet about every month or two, and they will have a list of usually about 10 cases that have gone through this process, and that's not only the department, but also the license applicant or licensee's last chance to make their argument to the commission, to answer any questions the commission has. Commission makes the final decision. But even if that comes against them, they've got an appeal process. They can appeal to a district court on matters of law. They can appeal that to the appellate court and even all the way up to the Texas Supreme Court if they want to. My point is there's a lot of protections in here to make sure that we're not abusing this really significant power we have to deny somebody entry into the profession, or at least delay that at that time. And it's not simply, you know, Trevor Thielen with a crown sitting on top of his hill and making a call on you're okay, but you're not. So when we look at each one of these applicants, we really use all of our laws and rules to break it down to about 2 different major decisions. The first one, do we think this applicant has the honesty, trustworthiness, and integrity to hold a license? And the second question is, does that person's criminal history show that there's a strong likelihood that they may abuse their license if they are given it or if they keep it? Or is there a danger to other people of this person having that particular license? When we're talking about honesty, integrity, trustworthiness, we're usually looking at a person's application because they're asked in every application, have you ever been convicted of or placed on deferred adjudication for or pled guilty to any offense other than a minor traffic violation? It surprised me when I started here how many people lie on that answer. And it doesn't really do them much good because we still look at the Department of Public Safety records to confirm things for ourselves, no matter which way that they answer it. Now, they may get a license initially. If they're already licensed, they might get the renewal to issue by lying on there. But we're still going to come back and look at it within a week, usually at least, at most. And if it's necessary, we can come back and revoke that license. We're also looking to criminal history questionnaires. These are sheets of paper for every crime that they've pled to that the applicant needs to fill out, and they need to explain to us what were the circumstances. Can you tell us what you did? Can you tell us why you did it? And if somebody's honest and forthright on there, that's going to tell me at the very least they're owning up to their past criminal history. They're trying to honestly move forward from it. If somebody's explaining, well, had a disagreement with my girlfriend as reason for aggravated assault with a deadly weapon, I don't think that's quite being entirely honest about what happened, and probably indicates that that person may not have grown past those feelings, you know, of anger, or frustration, or whatever that led to that. And that might indicate that they're a danger. But at the very least, it indicates they're trying to hide what's in their past. So we're concerned about that, but that's not all that we're looking at when we look at these license applicants. Criminal history that shows the possibility of abuse of others or abuse of the license. Then we're narrowing it down to the questions of what kind of crimes are we looking at in here. I had a case today that I looked at a guy that had a gambling den somewhere out in East Texas. I'm probably not going to be able to use that crime against him for most of the programs that we regulate. But offenses that we can always use, if something was committed within the last 5 years, it doesn't matter what type of offense it was, we can use that in our arguments of why somebody's license should be denied or revoked. We don't always. We often will overlook recent offenses if they clearly don't have anything to do with the license type, but it's a possibility. So no matter what we decide in the criminal conviction guidelines here today, recent offenses are always something that we can use if we need to. Another category we can always use, offenses that a judge by law can't give a person for probation, probation for. These are the really bad crimes usually. Your murders, your kidnappings, your sexual offenses. We can always use those, no matter what you decide here about the criminal conviction guidelines. And the third category is sexually violent offenses. There's a list of those in the Code of Criminal Procedure. We can always use those if appropriate. But usually we are looking at, is this crime directly related to the occupation? And this is the meat of what we're here to look at and what the work group has worked through. And it's important to keep in mind, even if you put crimes on the conviction guidelines, if enough time has passed, if a person's been rehabilitated or proven that they're not a danger even though they have this stuff in their past, they are eligible potentially for the license. It's that individualized call that we're going to make. But what you're going to give us is a tool to say, you know, the advisory committee looked at this, the commission looked at this, these are what we think are the really bad offenses to watch out for code enforcement officers. So let's go to the draft that we have. And each of these is going to be a generalized category and then give the reasons in writing for why we think those categories are a problem for code enforcement officers. The first one's crimes involving fraud, deceptive trade or business practices, or abuse of office. Obviously, a code enforcement officer has a great deal of responsibility and power, and we don't want somebody in that position who can abuse that power or has abused that power or is okay with forging or making false records in government records. So these are ones we're concerned about. On a similar category, we've got crimes involving bribery, forgery, tampering with a government record, or perjury. The same concerns there apply for us. I think those are pretty obvious. Crimes involving environmental law violations. You're in the occupation of keeping our environment safe. So if you yourself were not, if a code enforcement officer themselves were not taking care of the environment personally, that gives us great concern over how much care they're taking to protect others. Crimes against the person, such as homicide, kidnapping, and assault. And also the next one, crimes involving prohibited sexual conduct or public indecency. You will see these in almost every one of our criminal conviction guidelines for the programs. We can't predict the future, but we know that a license is in no way treated by the public as a stamp of approval that it's okay to interact with this person professionally. And we don't want to put people in a position where they could be physically victimized or sexually victimized by a code enforcement officer, and that's why we have these on the criminal conviction guidelines. Crimes involving children, the elderly, or the disabled as victims, really for the same reason, because code enforcement officers are in a position of authority, and these are particular categories of victims that are particularly vulnerable that we want to make sure we are protecting. And we don't want somebody with a history of exploiting those types of victims to strike again. Crimes against property, such as arson, theft, or burglary. Arson and burglary, those are really crimes against a piece of property, some sort of real estate structure. And code enforcement officers are in the position of protecting those pieces of property. This person who commits theft, that's a crime, what we call a crime of moral turpitude. It's really a violation of everybody's trust, and code enforcement officers should be able to be trusted to come into people's properties, come into people's homes if necessary, and not be having sticky fingers and victimizing other people using their position to do so. Crimes involving the delivery, possession, manufacturing, or use of controlled substances or dangerous drugs. A code enforcement officer, as I understand, would be traveling quite a bit autonomously and under basically kind of the official seal of whatever jurisdiction that they're in. And it would potentially create a cover for distribution of drugs, for collection of drugs, for buying of drugs or whatever. So we want to make sure that people who might be tempted to have that as a secondary source of income or just personal enjoyment would not be considered great candidates for code enforcement officers. And finally, a similar tact, we've got crimes involving being intoxicated by drugs or alcohol or dangerous substances. We don't want somebody with impaired judgment, perception, making the important decisions that code enforcement officers make every day. So that's why that category is on there. Are there any questions either about the criminal conviction guidelines that I've laid out here, the draft that was helped develop by the work group, or the overall process of what does TDLR do with criminal history?
I have a couple of questions.
Yes, ma'am.
I don't recall in our discussion when we were talking about this, the appeal time and process. I know we said we would look at some cases on an individual basis, but like if you send notification, example, you used the gentleman or the person that was a barber and how his crime was brought down to a lower level, terroristic threat. What is the notification time that we're looking at for somebody to appeal? Are we giving them 10 days, 30 days, and then what will be the turnaround time to respond? And the reason why I ask that is because we're dealing with people's livelihoods, the way that they, you know, their economics, their finances, and so if we are making, you know, exercising good judgment and making good decisions based on an individual case, what is the turnaround?
So it's kind of like a game of tennis. Every time that the ball goes one direction, it's kind of that side's has a big impact on how long it takes before it gets back over the net the other way. So let's go through it. A person applies and they have some criminal history and we want to take an initial look at it. That criminal history, that decision to take a look at it is usually going to be made within a day or two, a business day or two of them applying. That's about how long it'll take to get in front of one of the two attorneys that look at these cases. And we'll make, I come in every day and usually have a stack about that big of criminal histories to review and decide, do I clear them, which I do with probably 85 to 90% of every days, or do I say, do not clear, we need to look at these specific things and maybe gather these specific items.
I'm sorry, excuse me.
Yes.
Maybe I miscommunicated some information to you. I was talking about to the point where we've already sent them notifications saying, hey, you're not going to be a barber, you're not going to be a code enforcement officer. What is the citizens' appeal time from that particular step?
Well, we will send them that notice, and that notice is going to be very clear on its front page that they have 20 days to respond. Okay. And they're supposed to request a hearing in writing if that's the way that they want to go. But we also put our phone number and email, usually my legal assistant or Ken's legal assistant, that they can communicate with them, provide them that extra information. If they instead talk to the investigator who's been working with them, that message will get forwarded to us immediately. Now, if they miss that 20-day window, it depends on whether or not they're a licensee or an applicant. If they're an applicant, they miss that 20-day window, there's really, they have the burden of proof to prove that they are fit for the license. And so we're not going to have to take any additional action. The license is denied at that time. But let's say they come back within a year of applying and show us that, no, you really had it wrong. I really wasn't convicted of that offense. I didn't get my mail for whatever reason, or I couldn't respond immediately. If they contact us within that year period and show us that we were totally wrong in that situation, they're still potentially going to get the license at that point if we change our mind and decide to clear it. If they're a licensee already and they miss that 20-day window, then we have to go through an extra process of seeking a default order before we can revoke that license, because that's kind of a property right now that they already have in hand, and it's a greater, it requires a little more due process to take away something that a person already has than to deny something that they never had in the first place. So we will send them a notice in the mail that we plan to take a default because we haven't heard from you. And here's, again, you still got time to request a hearing or show us how we're wrong or send us any other information you think we ought to look at. I think that process gives them approximately about 20 to 30 days to respond to that notice before the default order is issued. And even if after we have sent the default, if we find out that we made a big mistake, which again is very rare that we're wrong about the offense that we're talking about, we can ask the executive director who signed that default order to do a nunc-pro-tunc order to rescind it and to fix that problem. But assuming that they want a hearing, do you want to know kind of how long that process takes?
Yes.
Okay. If somebody requests a hearing, then they're going to be set for a hearing as soon as we can set it. The problem is that we have a number of cases that are always waiting in the wings for hearings. So if you, for example, today were to try to, on one of my cases, ask for a hearing, I know that I am full up on hearing dates through July, and probably you're going to get a hearing in early August or mid-August, somewhere around then, if you were making that request for a hearing today and we could get that set up. And the court had dates available, which they generally do, because there's lots of administrative law judges. The hearing would take place on that day unless one of the sides, usually the license applicant, files a motion for continuance. That can delay things however long it delays it, a day, a week, a month. It just depends on the circumstances. But assuming we go forward with the hearing that day, the administrative law judge, again, doesn't make the final decision, and they have to make a written proposal and application of the laws. By law, that ALJ has 60 days to issue that written proposal. And that's because this is a document that's usually about 10 to 15 pages long. It's complicated, and it's, again, taking a very particular individualized look at this person, at the evidence in this particular case. I've seen PFDs come in just this last week. I've had 2 come in less than a month after the hearing date. But sometimes they take the full 2 months. It just depends on the ALJ and their circumstances. Once the proposal comes in, there's a very short, I think it's 5-day window where one of the sides, if they object to what the judge has found, they can file written objections to that. We call them exceptions. And the other side gets about 5 days to respond to that. And the judge then has an additional 15 days to respond if they wish to change anything. But after that, the SOA process is pretty much final, and we're going to have it set on a commission meeting date. If everything is final before the next agenda that's decided on for a commission meeting, as long as that hasn't started being put together and finalized already, then it'll go on the next meeting's agenda, and that's usually 60 to 90 days after the PFD comes in. But that's an estimate. And I can see it happening different ways. But that commission meeting is going to be the date that they get a final decision. Whether they appear or not, the commission is going to vote, and unless they deadlock for some reason,
which is rare, the case should be resolved that day, unless, of course, the one side or the other, and that's almost always going to be the license applicant, says, I can't make it to the commission meeting. Can you please move it back to another meeting? Here's something to keep in mind. While a license applicant won't get their license until this process is finished and it comes in their favor, a licensee who we're proposing to deny, as long as they've been renewing on time, their license isn't going to be taken away while this process is unfolding. On the other hand, it's totally the opposite. They get to keep their license for as long as this process drags out, if they are an active licensee and they are continuing to renew it timely. So very different consequences for somebody outside the industry trying to get in versus somebody who's already in and we're trying to take it away. Again, it's that different level of who has the burden to prove things, either the state or the license applicant, that we talked about earlier, that kind of affects how that process unfolds. Does that give you a kind of an overview of it?
Yes, thank you. I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Are there any further questions?
The other question I had, I think you may have answered this previously in our work session, was did we look at how many of years would pass that we were considered to be reasonable for some people who did have these crimes? You know, like example, police, if it's been 15 years since they did a robbery, then yeah, you can put in an application to be a police officer. Did we establish a time frame for the code enforcement officers?
We do not, in our criminal conviction guidelines, establish a clear, this many years equals you're going to be okay or you're not going to be okay, because it could be 15 years, but it could be the most heinous version of that offense imaginable. On the other hand, it could be 3 or 4 years since a particular offense happened. But the facts of that case and what that person's done since indicate that, you know what, we still should take a chance on them and issue them the license. So we don't determine in our guidelines how many years are appropriate. That's part of that overall evaluation that we're doing on an individualized case. We're looking for rehabilitation. We're looking for letters of recommendation. We're looking for how old were they when they committed the offense? Have they committed lots of similar offenses? How closely, even if they're on the criminal conviction guidelines, how really closely was this particular offense related to the occupation or not? And how many years has it been now since they did that? How many years have they been out of prison? All of these things are things that Ken and I and the judges and the commission on each of these cases take into deep consideration and weigh. And it's really, like I said, there's no mathematical formula that we can put together that's going to ensure fairness, as much as we really just need to take an overall look at this person and decide personally, should they have the license or not.
Thank you.
I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
On the statistics that we saw today, it only gives us information about how many new registrations were issued, either for the officer or officer in training. But you know, this discussion kind of spurred an interest in me as to, you know, how many of these cases are we talking about when, you know, the application has to be denied due to some kind of a criminal past? You know, how frequent, what kind of a, you know, how does that compare to the overall applications received by the agency?
I do not have particular statistics for you, but that does seem like something that we could get for the next meeting, I would believe. Chris is indicating yes. I will tell you just in general, the vast majority of applicants don't even get seen by me or Kim because they don't have a criminal history. And of the ones that have a criminal history, the vast majority of those in, especially in these health programs that we're looking at, still qualify for the license despite having that criminal history. It's really a concentrated few where we've narrowed down that I just don't know about this person being entrusted to go into those homes. But we, I'm sure, could get you more particular statistics on that at a future meeting. I don't have them in my head.
I think that's a good idea, because also as I'm listening to also the efforts being done about the educational and CEUs programs, I think this will be a valuable information to know in case to kind of see the patterns and see if there's also a need to, tailor educational programs to address some of those issues. Just kind of a thought that popped in my mind as I'm listening to that whole conversation.
Any other questions?
Just one last thing.
Yes, ma'am.
I'm sorry it's me today, y'all.
It's fine.
It was on our meeting when we had this. One other thing comes to mind, mental conditions. I know we put together a group of items where we were reviewing in regards to who can qualify for code enforcement licenses. Or are we looking at mental issues? Because there are a lot of things when we're dealing with the public that would trigger certain individuals with mental conditions to react aggressively with our citizens.
Well, if a person had mental issues that had resulted in them having some sort of criminal history background, that would be what we're looking at. If they have just...
Only as a result, you got to do something before we look at it. Okay.
I think that's the case, because I don't know of another way that we're going to know about and be able to evaluate somebody's fitness for the license. Even legally, the things that we're empowered to look at are really the criminal things by these statutes that I get into in my paperwork that I'm trying to avoid, reciting for you. But really, the state's rules that empower us to deny a license for very specific reasons, I'm not aware that they get into, does this person have questionable mental status or not?
Well,
separate from the criminal history.
I hate to keep using fire and police as an example, but I believe that's part of their background investigation and part of their application. We have to know they take a competency test as well as, test for mental issues before they get hired on. And I know, being a code enforcement officer for almost 20 years now, Teresa, that's one of the big things that code has to deal with, because a number of our officers are ex-police officer, ex-fire, or ex-sanitarians, or construction building officials. So that's one thing that I know that we haven't really examined closely that other departments have.
Well, it could be an issue that we could get briefed on more fully at the next meeting, I would assume.
Currently,
Well-
Mary Winston, TDLR, and Doug, we were chatting over here. Currently, that's not part of the statute, so that's something we can talk about. But if it's not statutory, we can't have our General Counsel's Office draft rules. But let's have a discussion afterwards, so we can just talk about it a little more. But right now, it's currently out of our purview to make that drastic of or complete of a diagnostic.
And if I may add, Carla James, TDLR, our licensing director is in the room with us and said that it's less than 1% who are not licensed because of criminal background history.
Are there any further questions? With that said, is there a motion to adopt the criminal conviction guidelines as presented today?
I move that we adopt them. Yes.
We have a motion?
Second.
We have a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, thank you very much for the information. You guys did a great job on this. The next agenda item has to do with recommendations for agenda items for our next advisory committee meeting. Are there any recommendations?
Madam Chair, Doug Jennings, Assistant General Counsel. I would suggest a work group report from the licensing work group, and we might craft that agenda item fairly broadly, just so we can make sure that we can encompass the full discussion about what we talked about earlier. So that's my recommendation. Thank you.
Are there any others? As always, if you have any agenda items that you would like to see in the future, please email TDLR staff, And they are very accommodating, and so we will do that. And or if you hear anything from code enforcement officers that reach out to you about issues, then please convey that information to TDLR as well, so that they can get it on the next agenda. The next agenda item is the discussion of the date and time of our future meeting, and we'll just hold off on that for now and wait for us to be contacted by your staff at a later date. That's coming up into the holidays, so. With that, seeing no other agenda items, I will call for a motion to adjourn.
We adjourn.
A second?
Second.
Okay, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you.